Hello, and welcome to Replay Value. Well, I finally watched an episode of Bakemonogatari, shoutouts to the RNG for that one, and because it's been so heavily requested in the past, I kind of feel bad that I'll be talking very briefly about it, and not about the elements that many would presumably want me to talk about. But the submission specifically asked for me to talk about the voice acting in the first episode. Going in, I thought there would be a performance similar to the "When supernatural battles became commonplace, I don't understand" scene, which, despite never having seen the show, I think I've watched it a dozen times. If that scene is held up as the epitome of voice acting in anime, and bad abridged series where the person is speaking into a laptop mic while rubbing sandpaper on it is the antithesis, Monogatari's first episode feels like it's right in the middle. And that's a kind of hard place to be in my position. There isn't really much to criticize or elevate, it just felt really standard. Standard isn't a bad thing, but as someone who is not a professional voice actor nor works with voice actors, I lack the vocabulary to speak to the minutia in performance. That leaves me with the impact that voice acting has on anyone, how it conveys tone and impressions of a character. And by far the most interesting stylistic choice for a performance in this episode for me as a first-time watcher with zero knowledge of Monogatari besides some of the character names was definitely Senjougahara's first speaking scene. When someone is speaking, there's generally three things to consider. First are the actual words being spoken. That's a no-brainer. Sometimes the words are gibberish and not actually relevant, but inherently when we think about the construction of dialogue, diction matters. Second is the context or the subtext. There's a big difference in your interpretation of the words spoken depending on your knowledge. "I'm out" works in a variety of situations, but there's a world of difference between that referring to an oxygen tank in the vacuum of space and being eliminated from a board game. And finally, there's the performance, or the tone with which it's said. A crying goodbye is a huge departure from a stoic one, even if they're the same both in context and diction, because of what it says about the character's emotional states or personality types. All of these elements interplay with one another to create meaning, but the performance aspect is probably the easiest one to understand because it's emotion-based, which makes it intrinsic human knowledge. I find that it's the hardest one to talk about for that exact reason. Why would I restate what is so obviously brought across in the performance itself unless it was particularly outstanding? Or in the flip case, criticizing for its inability to convey emotion. When those three aspects are in lockstep, I find it easier to look at the words or the context to develop meaning, since those are a bit more concrete as opposed to performance, which is more ephemeral. That being said, there's one circumstance where I think there is clear value in exploring the performance explicitly, and that would be when it's at odds with the word choice and/or the context, because that's where the stylistic decision is so revealing about the character, in a way that is separate from those two elements. The first time we hear Senjougahara's voice is when she's falling down, but there it's just a sudden breath and a gasp as she slips over the banana peel. In retrospect, maybe it's a little bit subdued given that it's a big fall, but on my first watch, it just felt like it matched the stylistic elements of the sequence, especially because of the echoing on the gasp. Araragi with the big catch to save the day, and we move on with no words being exchanged. The next time we see, or should I say hear her, is after Araragi's discussion with Hanekawa.
Hanekawa-san to nani o hanashite ita no?
Honestly, I dig the juxtaposition. The innocent, neutral-toned question immediately followed up with a threat of violence. Senjougahara's "don't move" isn't stated like a threat, but instead like an order, which is almost immediately retracted and replaced with a statement of fact. And if I had to pick one word to define her tone throughout the scene, it would be just that: factual. Almost as though it's constructed to show no emotion whatsoever, even while it projects an absurd amount of confidence.
Nani yo? Migi ga sabishii no?
There's zero hints of her wavering in what she's doing in her voice. Even as the camera excitedly jumps and pans around, she is stable in her statements. It's almost like she's rehearsed exactly what she's going to say. What's really interesting to me, though, is the fact that she explains so much about what happened to her. Like when she says she met a crab, and the specifics about how much she should weigh versus how much she does weigh, and when this happened. And yet, that seems at odds with the no-nonsense tone where, presumably, she would get right to the point about her demands. Even though she explains that she doesn't want him poking around, doesn't the physical threat already cover that possibility? Admittedly, you don't have a show if Araragi doesn't find out the circumstances, but I think, and again, I could be totally wrong about this, it suggests a desire to be close with others and yet a concern about the very same thing. That contrast in the words, and the tone with which they are spoken to develop a subtext, which again, I'll have to see whether that's borne out or not as I continue the show, invites you to consider the dialogue more closely. Is it more chilling that Senjougahara's voice is flat and measured as she's threatening to cut and staple his mouth than if she was screaming crazily? Definitely. It means that she's acting quote-unquote rationally in what would otherwise seem to be a completely irrational scene, and it gives extra heft to her threat, again, because of the confidence it exudes. It would be wrong of me to ignore the repetitive and disconcerting melody in this scene as to how it develops its unsettling tone, especially because of how well it works here.
即座に攻撃に移るわ。そう、ありがとう。
You can't divorce the music from how you interpret the lines because the former, again, feels statement of fact, extremely cold, whereas the latter feels a bit warmer. Not by a significant margin, but a little bit more human. But even that seems to be a calculated decision because she does wind up stapling his mouth. Notably, in the aftermath, it doesn't seem like she took pleasure in the action of causing pain. It was just necessary to make it clear she wasn't messing around, as seems to be the indication of the final line's slower, more emphasized delivery.
よろしくさん。
Which is very clearly a threat. The following conversation after the move down the staircase is more of the same, but I love the part where she threatens war in the usual tone, and when Araragi declines, the playful, disappointed tone as she says, "You don't?" as though she's having fun, either at the idea of fighting and is now actually disappointed, or in playing into a trope that she's subverting, made more possible later when she starts talking about moe and tsunderes. The first real departure from her cold tone is after she sees his completely healed mouth.
あなた、それってどういう？
It's not like her surprise leads to an outpouring of emotion, but there's legitimate inquisitiveness there, which helps to confirm that she's not some sort of robot, but rather just more somber, enervating. All in all, the first impression suggests a very deep character, mostly carried by how the performance of Senjougahara's voice counters the words being spoken and her actions, leaving a gap that is full of space to inquire in. Even as it shows her as a confident, strong, and no-nonsense character, it also suggests that her cold exterior is, maybe, just a shield. And at the very least, even if my analysis of that is dead wrong, and it very well might be, that there's more depth to this character than would meet the eye just purely through the spoken word. Of course, I have to give credit to Chiwa Saito for the performance, and presumably both her and the production team for the stylistic decision of how to voice the character. Fun fact, she also voices Yona, who is a totally different kind of character through the first episode, so I had a good laugh when I pulled up that fact. What's your favorite voice acting performance and how it juxtaposed the words or context of the dialogue? And be sure to leave a like because it helps with the algorithm. Next time, I'll be back either on Code Geass or Steins Gate, so keep your eyes out for that, but until then, thanks for watching.